Good afternoon, brethren. So this afternoon we're going to hear a talk from Robert Johnson, and then we'll have a break and we'll set up, and the Masonic Roundtable will do a broadcast from right up here on stage. They'll be taking questions from the audience. We'll have microphones being sent around, and my understanding is that we're also going to be able to take questions via your phone. And so you get a sense of what it's like to actually respond to them when they're doing their podcast. So maybe John can explain this a little more.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we're going to try an experiment today. There is open Wi-Fi here, so since most of us have smartphones now, try to connect to the Wi-Fi here. And during Robert's presentation, go to slido.com/TMR-PA. And it'll bring up a little interface where you can ask a question. You don't need to log in or anything. And you can type your question in there. Also, you can view all the other questions that have been asked. So if someone's asking a question that you've already thought about, you can give them a little thumbs up, a little like. And so the most popular questions will bubble up to the top. And we'll take those questions and we'll put them up on the screen during the panel this afternoon. But think of your questions now. Get out your phones, tablets, and iPads and go to slido.com/TMR-PA and type your questions in. You can be anonymous or you can put your name in there as well. And we'll try this out. We'll see how it works. We'll also have questions by microphones in the room. I'll be moderating the discussion, making sure we're all on track. But I wanted to try out this neat experiment with the technology we have, and we'll see how it works. If there's any questions, find me. I'll be in the back of the room, and I can help you get your IT set up. All right? Thanks. On to the Robert Johnson. Where's he located? Have we found him yet? There he is. All right, back to you.
Thanks. So our next speaker is Robert Johnson. He is the senior warden at Walking Lodge number 78 in Chicago, Illinois, and also the host of the podcast, Whence Came You? And when I first met Robert yesterday, I asked him if he played guitar, because Robert Johnson is actually the name of my favorite blues player. You may or may not know him. And he says, no, he doesn't play guitar, but he's named after him, which is almost as good. So, Robert, come on up.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. So, hope you guys all had a good lunch. And just a quick correction. Since the bio was actually given, I've actually been a past master of my lodge. And currently I help out the district on some levels. This presentation will be a little bit different than some, mostly because I'm a horrible storyteller. I'm a decent writer, and I can read. So I have my presentation on paper. I will read what I have for you. There'll be some interjection with some other thoughts and things. But in addition to that, we've got some good slides and things and a couple little videos intermixed. So we'll hope that the IT holds out. So the presentation today is called The Word and Reality. So I've given this presentation a few times. It's actually, it's all over the place. It's an adaptation of a paper that I wrote and which was published in the Allied Masonic Degrees annual publication, Miscellanea, about a year or two ago. And that was about a 5-page piece, since which time it's evolved into several more pages as this adapted presentation. So at points in this presentation, I'll talk about Freemasonry, science, physics, sound, anecdotal stories, and factual stories. Because of the sheer amount of puzzle pieces involved and how big of an idea that we're going for, I find it necessary to kind of clearly state the position of the presentation before we dive in. So through this presentation, there's a couple of goals I hope to establish, which is the to establish that sacred words used in Freemasonry as passwords and other uses are allusions to or placeholders for other magical words. To establish that magical words are the evolution of an idea of the word, or what we call in religious circles the tetragrammaton. And that the word, as outlined in numerous religious texts, were perhaps not a word, but perhaps more broadly understood as sounds. And finally, that science might prove that creation is the result of a sound, perhaps a word, the legend of which has spanned generations and iterations, some lost, some ever present, but always connected to their ancestral and etymological roots of those first uses. So Masonry teaches us that Hiram, we have slides? Are we working? Sorry. All right. You can skip this. This was going to be my presentation until I decided to change it. So we'll move. All right. So we'll move on to slide number 1. Masonry teaches us that Hiram, someone who was raised by the Word, but not just any word, the word of a Master Mason. So I'd like for you all to take a look back. In fact, let's go back to the moment that you were raised, for our Master Masons. Everybody else, you might get there someday. I hope you do. So do you remember when the Master told you that you could never give that word or receive it unless you were in the proper position and only in low breath, all these interesting stipulations? Many scholars, Masonic and alike, have dismissed the story of Hiram Abiff, which is fine. That doesn't really matter. I would ask you to remember back a little bit with Brother Jason Richards' excellent presentation up here, where he explained the difference between myth and allegory. And remember that throughout this presentation. So we know that Masonry was operative, containing at some point no less than 7 degrees, still conferred upon those who are in operative lodges. At a point we went speculative. The degrees were split up, variations occurred. The original 3rd degree being lost to time or had been seen as antiquated, then just removed. Again, we'd referenced Brother Jason Richards' presentation. So the legend of Hiram was implemented while degrees were adapted into what is now known as the Royal Arch, where we receive the true word. More information would be available on this if you'd like. Check out your local Royal Arch chapters, and there's some great reading material available to you all over the place. Going back to the dismissed legend of Hiram, which I have said again doesn't matter so much in this instance. What does matter is the idea of the word itself. Looking back, there is a point in our degrees that we receive a password. These passwords allude to, I would hope, a lost word or perhaps the tetragrammaton. Do you also remember when you were told that the word you received was not actually the true word, and that it will, however, be used in place for all lodges until the true word was discovered by future generations? So for sake of time, let us now move forward to the quote-unquote higher degrees within Freemasonry of the York and Scottish Rite systems, where you do discover the true word, its meaning, and to whom it is attributed, which will bring us to the subject on hand. However, before proceeding, we should acknowledge that there are roughly currently working 3 versions of this word, one used by the York Rite College, another used by older York Rite chapters, which is also the one given in some Scottish Rite valleys, who put on the 13th degree of the ancient accepted Scottish Rite Southern jurisdiction, and also another that's referenced in the 15th degree of the same. But we can rest assured that all of these must have their place, and albeit an ancient one, in relation to the tetragrammaton. So featured here, this picture is kind of a wheel of sorts that shows the many different names that we use as the tetragrammaton, or the name of God. So the tetragrammaton is the unspeakable name of God according to most religions, and also the foundation for the legend of the Word. In the Jewish faith, there are several versions of the name of God. One in particular represented by 4 characters which give a certain sound when pronounced. In English, the sounds are best represented by 4 letters, namely in the sequence YHWH, read from right to left. Many religions teach that God created all things with the use of the Word. This Word over time became the Gospels, and as some call it, the Good News, and this is in no small part due to the evangelizing of Christian faiths, which, to be sure, is possibly a slight departure from its original contextual and mythological use. And we talked about allegory hiding things. So, through all time, all societies, secret and open, through religious fervor, the study of deistic theosophy, and esoteric mystery schools, things that happened in Greece and Egypt, teachings we have searched for in this true name, this unpronounceable name of God, and how to pronounce it as if it could somehow do something for the speaker or be used to an end of some sorts, tamed by mere men for the use of earthly deeds. Pictured here is a web capture of a website who will sell you the 4 master keys of the Tetragrammaton for $444.44. You can add to cart, share it on Google+, tweet about it, Pinterest, all that good stuff. Accomplish anything you desire. Money, love, power, youth, luck. Too good to be true. The legend of Ra is an interesting story. Ra, being the Egyptian creator of heaven and earth, walks around on earth making his daily travels. It's this old legend, and I have a book called The Egyptian Mythology, and it's published in the 60s, and it has this great story. And the story goes something like this. Master Masons will find this interesting, I think. Ra, being this Egyptian creator of heaven and earth, walked around on earth making daily travels. Isis knew of his secret by which his power was manifested, which was also through his name, but not the name Ra. His secret name. She devises this plan to extract the name by casting a clay snake made with some of the drool that Ra had expelled while walking as this old man. So she places this snake on his path. The snake bites him, and she kind of blackmails him. And his life for the name, he tells her, she says, you have to give me your name. And he refuses to do so. And all the other gods are walking around, and they're, what can we do for you? How do we fix you? And she tells him, you have to give me your name, and I'll fix you. She's this kind of witch doctor figure. And he says, fine, So he says, I am the maker of heaven and earth. I am the establisher of moments. I am the creator of the waters. I am the maker of the secrets of the 2 horizons. I am the light. I am the darkness. I am the maker of hours, the creator of days. I am the opener of festivals. I am the maker of the running streams. I am the creator of living flame. I am Khepera in the morning, Ra at noontide, and Atmu in the evening. She's not fooled by this. She knows all this. So she says, look, I know your secret. Give me the word. So he, through some coercion, he says, let Isis come with me and let my name pass from my breast to her breast. Again, interesting. You may recall reading the book of Exodus, specifically 2019, that the people of Israel pleaded with Moses to talk to God by himself because the sound of God's voice was too much for anyone to take. The quote says, and I said to Moses, speak to us yourself and we will listen, but do not have God speak to us, or we will die. So I ask you to jump forward to modern day. This is where science meets faith, where exciting ideas become proven facts, or at least mathematical probabilities, which you can test and get reasonably replicable results. Think of a modern-day singer and his or her ability to shatter glass by using their voice. Get a small video clip. Let's see if it plays. there's basically sound coming out of a speaker, and it makes this glass vibrate. You can see kind of some of the effects. It shatters. There's a slow-mo shot of the sound really flexing the glass here. I'm kind of glad there's no sound for this slide because it's pretty ear-piercing. Go ahead and flip to the next slide for me. So you can think of the stories you may have heard about a genius named Nikola Tesla who claimed that he could split the Earth into two pieces by matching its frequency, or Earth's frequency. Perhaps the latter might be of a stretch, but we know sound can destroy. Think about the story of Jericho. So I say to you guys now, as Isaac Newton once proposed, that every action has an equal and opposite reaction. We know of the existence of black holes which suck all things into them, crushing them down to singularities, a point so small and incomprehensibly dense, and yet we know that there are white holes now also spewing matter into the universe. What does this have to do with the word? Well, simply put, can a sound be used to create? Could an entity of vast and pure knowledge, seemingly omnipotent, communicate in such a way a word, its word, that brought about the actual creation as we know it, perhaps the Big Bang? What's more strange is that science, now more than ever before, might actually support these ideas. Let us talk about physics for just a moment. This is a portion of this presentation that is a little bit heavy, but I think I've broken it down enough. If I can understand it, I'm not great with physics, so I think you might find it interesting. So don't get scared by this. So if we can get you to, we know that everything in this universe is understood by using two theories. The first theory is Einstein's general theory of relativity, which explains all these fundamental forces like gravitational interaction, and some others called strong interaction, electromagnetic interaction, and weak interaction on a large scale, like planets and suns. The second theory that we use is to work out particle physics, the really small stuff. And it tells us the following. So if we look at gravitational interaction, that is the long-range attractive force that acts on all particles using particles called gravitons, futuristic-sounding things. Weak interaction, responsible for some forms of short-range radiation which can act on electrons. Electromagnetic interaction, responsible for electrically charged particles, and is also responsible for photons. Strong interaction, responsible for holding quarks together, the little things that make up neutrons and protons, which then, in combination, form things like nucleus or nuclei. Now, I know that's confusing. We went from a quark to a nuclei. And the nuclei may at least sound familiar to you, as it's a plural form of nucleus, which we might all remember from high school chemistry class. Nuclei are what make up each cell of every bit of matter that exists. So if we work backwards, we may have found a clue to sound waves and a possible interaction on the smallest part of all building materials in creation. Let's do just that. So if we work backward, you have a cell, which then gives you a nucleus, and inside this you have a proton and some electrons, and you have quarks, which hold together these protons and electrons so that the nucleus can stay together. Quarks are like this subatomic superglue. But what are quarks made of? Stay with me, we're going to get there in just a second. Scientists have for years, including Einstein in his last 30, struggled to figure out how to join these two theories together, that being Einstein's general theory of relativity and the big stuff, which is the big stuff, and then the theory that we use to figure out all the small stuff, which we just explained, in order to form something called a unified theory. The problem with putting these two together, these two mathematical formulas, was that basically, whenever they tried to bring them together, they would break down, and they didn't really think that they worked well, and one caused the other to have odd things happen, and mathematical formulas like breakdowns of matter and all kinds of odd things. But finally, these two guys worked on a theory that had been criticized in the past for having anomalies, or rather parts that made matter do these strange things on paper. But after some painstaking work, they actually found that it did not have anomalies, and that these oddities the formula created were actually found to be things that actually did happen within the construct of our understanding of the laws of nature and our physical universe. These discoveries were new. This new bonded theory was called string theory. This theorized exactly what is proposed above. It tells us that strings make up quarks. If quarks are the superglue that hold the nucleus together, these strings must be the elements or the secret sauce which holds quarks together. These strings are described by physicists as being like tiny little rubber bands which vibrate at frequencies and flip-flop around like writhing snakes. How big is a string? So this artist rendition of a string. The string is, it's pretty small, guys. If an atom were the size of an entire solar system, a string would be as big as a tree on Earth. This is the smallest thing, or the form of anything that we know to exist outside something called the boson-Higgs or the God particle. Is there something smaller than this? Right now, science says no, because they view these things as fundamental or a foundation of sorts. Meaning, you know, for better lack of a term, it is what it is at this point. We haven't really found anything smaller yet. These vibrating strings that everything is made of, however, can be called the infinite orchestra of the universe. I then ask you that is sound of the universe simply this infinite echo or the uttering of a word or a sound? Mythology to science and vice versa has been played like a perpetual game of tennis or even racquetball, owing to its unpredictable angles and velocities. You can find holes in this theory, like many of the things we've talked about today, but we have to quote Frank Herbert sometimes. If you guys know who he is, he's author of a science fiction novel called Dune, and he was quoted as saying, the beginning of knowledge is the discovery of something that we don't yet understand. So as humans, we tend to create new things, but this does not prove our understanding of the universe. Rather, the things that we invent help us to understand the things in our universe, and sometimes make us go mad. For these things that exist in our universe in totality may not be, and I dare say should not be, comprehensible to men. We are pretty small on this grand scale of things. The mystery of sound, however, is an incredible, incredible mystery. The doctors, when posed the question, which would you rather lose, the ability to hear or the ability to see, have an interesting answer. But before we get to that, you can quote national studies that say that when people are asked this question on a whim, they always say, well, I'd rather lose my hearing. I like seeing a lot. I don't want to go blind. Doctors, on the other hand, will tell you they'd rather lose their sight because hearing is actually more valuable in the survival of the species. Interesting. Sounds are known through the ages as having mystical powers, magical properties, and even healing attributes. How deep does this mystery of sound go? We can explore a few interesting anecdotes and stories attributed to these mysteries. First is a story of an alligator named Oscar. After World War II, the New York Philharmonic visited the American Museum of Natural History. During a rehearsal, an alligator named Oscar began to bellow. The Philharmonic became amused, and the staff became curious. After several of the group played various instruments and at different tones, it was discovered that the mystery sound which made Oscar bellow was a B flat. The experiment has since been tried numerous times, and many times with the same outcome, even when different alligators and reptiles are subjected. In another mystery of sound, this one is purely anecdotal. The story stemming from a radio program out of Cape Cod. A gentleman named Mr. Fripp, who was a piano tuner by trade, was walking up a staircase when something out of this world happened. He was humming to himself, walking up the stairs, in B flat, when he realized that his voice had quite literally escaped him. As he ascended the staircase, he heard an echo of his humming, and he stopped his humming suddenly to hear where it was coming from. And it was at the landing of his staircase coming from the corner of where the two walls joined together. Some sort of odd echo was happening. According to scholars who explore alternate histories, the Great Pyramids at Giza actually were sound chambers used to heal the sick in a time before recorded history, when the Nile Valley civilizations were still matriarchal in nature. The mystery continues with yet perhaps the most astounding of all. A B flat is also the sound projected from a black hole. In 2003, NASA scientists recorded an ambient sound wave emanating from the center of a supermassive black hole. The black hole in question is a mere 250 million light years from Earth. So if we think about that for just one moment, a black hole 250 million light years from Earth, in this Perseus cluster of galaxies was emanating a noise. It's an incredible distance. So the speed of light is 186,282 miles per second. So if we traveled at 186,282 miles per second, every second for a period of 250 million years would be at the source of this B flat coming out of a black hole. It's pretty incredible. NASA says that we cannot actually physically hear this B flat because it's actually more than 50 octaves lower than middle C, which is about 1,000,000 billion times lower than the human ear can audibly discern. These apparent mysteries and discoveries have led to a newer field in sound research. The study of sound, sound vibration, and its effects on things are known to many as cymatics. Today, cymatics is somewhat of a wild science, the field dominated by a few people of accreditation. It is admittedly a young field as far as modern academics are concerned. Cymatic experiments can prove to be entertaining, to say the least. So we're going to watch a quick video here, which is an amazing experiment that came from Make magazine, which me and my kids actually duplicated at home. So you're going to see this guy, Collins Lab Notes, DIY, do-it-yourself cymatics, and he's basically, since there's no sound, he's basically saying, hey guys, there's this really neat thing called cymatics. So Jason, if you could click toward the middle. So we're looking at some sound waves happening on just regular water and fluid. But what he tends to do here, he's going to actually take water and mix it with baking soda to make a special concoction you guys may have made maybe in 8th grade. So he mixes this he mixes this up, pours it inside this dish that sits on top of a subwoofer, and he puts a sine wave through it. You can kind of see as he ups the amplitude, the different interesting things. Now at this point, you're just seeing a smoother and slower depiction of what happens with water. But as he ups the amplitude, you can see this fluid actually rising into the air. Depending on the amplitude, depending on your fluid, any number of things can happen. In a second, you'll see this stuff really starts to get out of control. This is just by pushing sound through fluid. So you can notice how something begins to happen to liquids as the sounds move through a speaker, through a liquid, as the liquid seems to almost come to life as it spires and reaches out of its containment dish and reaches into the air. The vibrations created some sort of thing for our amusement. The possibilities in the field of cymatics, with any great field in science, is endless. Through all of our rituals, rites, degrees, we gather a myriad of passes, or words. Some are mere passwords, alluding to some part of a degree. Others are sacred words, never to be spoken aloud. These words all have something in common: magic, or what seems to the untrained mind to be magic. The magic of words, from the rituals of our ancient brethren to seemingly unrelated top hat magicians at child's birthday parties, exist and have a deep history indeed. Some interesting examples would include an ancient Sanskrit character which represents a syllable or a sound which is sacred in the Hindu language, the Om. The practice of Hindu mystics or yogis, as they're sometimes referred to, is essentially to add this sound at the beginning and the end of prayers or mantras, because they believe that it invites the deity to experience and listen, a calling card of sorts. In the Hindu custom, they believe that the divine and the all-encompassing consciousness took the form of this sound, and through its vibration manifested all of creation, and that the Om is the reflection of absolute reality, beginning and end. Om is the vibration of the Supreme Being. The magic of words has existed like our fraternity since time immemorial. Pose the question, what makes abracadabra magic? Upon the surface, we find its origin lies in an amulet prescribed to be worn by sufferers of malaria in ancient Rome. It was a triangular pendant with the word abracadabra written across it over and over, and in each succeeding line one letter added or removed and placed on the next line until at the end, or at the top or the bottom, the amulet had but just the A. You can see kind of the way it works. If one goes even deeper and searches for the meaning of the word, we find that in fact in Latin it means to open the corpse, which is pretty morbid, but perhaps an allusion to mortality. On the contrary, in Aramaic, we find the most impressive and astounding meaning, which is, I create as I speak. Could this be an ancient reference to the word? Could it be a reference to the power of will? This is to me certainly why this phrase of pop culture magicians originally caught on and has been used. Though its meaning has been lost unto all but the scholar, one would have to agree on the basis that there were probably even more and older secret words which had magic powers, powers unknown to mankind, much like the words we use today in our rituals and rites. And maybe they don't do anything because they, like the Ephraimites of our Masonic mythos, can't frame to pronounce those words correctly. In conclusion, after taking you with me on a somewhat technical and wild ride through the sense of hearing, the contemplation of the word, the science and the mystery that permeates into all aspects of life, sound and vibration, and their effects on all of what we perceive, it's now my contention to propose that creation itself may have sprang forth through an actual, guttural, literal noise, which we refer to as the word, and is possibly still causing creation through its infinite echo or vibration, perhaps in B flat, or some other infinite, incomprehensible key in an octave so inaudible to us, caused by a higher, more intelligent, and seemingly omnipotent being we might call God. Thank you, guys. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Robert. Vibration does indeed seem to be at the heart of a lot of things. I don't know if did you heard of frequency 7 machines? Frequency 7 machines were a machine invented by a French scientist named Gavrode, because he had a science laboratory underneath an air conditioning system, and every time he went to work, he got sick. And he found out that what made him sick was the machine was actually vibrating at 7 cycles per second, which seemed to be close to the vibratory pattern of the human body, as we saw with regard to the wine glasses there. And so the anecdotal story is he decided to explore the power of these low frequency 7 cycle per second tones. We can only hear down to about 20. So he built a big whistle, attached a bellows to it, had his assistant blow the whistle, and he fell dead on the spot because all his organs turned to mush. There you go. Take that for what it's worth. Well, so now what we'll do is we'll have a break. We'll set the tables up here for the Masonic Roundtable to have a roundtable right here in DK Auditorium, and you can ask questions either by a microphone or by your cell phone.
Yeah, speak.
I don't have to worry about what? Yeah, it's true. I might as well just drop them now.
Yes.
Well, if the members of the Masonic Roundtable could please assemble up front here. So while they're getting up here, I thought now would be an appropriate time to thank Rich Whitman and Seth Anthony for all the hard work they've put in arranging this whole thing to work. There was a lot of audiovisual technology, a lot of computer technology, and things have really worked smoothly here. Why don't we give them a big round of applause? That's Rich Whitman and Seth Anthony. And of course the members of the Masonic Roundtable, without which not. Well, we appreciate it, guys, so take it away.
So, yeah, everybody, is this thing on? No. Okay. Yeah, so everybody, as we're doing this, oh, there it is. Wonderful. When you get far enough into masonry, you really learn to appreciate the sound of your own voice. At least that's what I've heard. So as we're doing this, boom. As we're doing this, please keep submitting your questions. Those of you who are live streaming, we had about 35 people watching this online with us this morning, and that's absolutely fantastic. So keep submitting your questions. Keep voting for the ones that you want us to talk about. We're going to go through the topics on John's phone, and for anyone who's interested, after this thing ends, we will actually be at the Holiday Inn Express in Elizabethtown with some beverages, and we'd love to continue the conversation with you over there.
Okay, is this on? Hello? Excellent. Wow, so the experiment worked, and technology kept with us. The gremlins did not take things over, and so on that URL above. You guys have been great in submitting questions. What's that?
Feedback. Get
The feedback. I am getting feedback. They're working it, I'm sure. So let's start with the first question, which is, what can we do to petition our Grand Lodge to eliminate one-day classes, given your excellent presentation?
Just say no.
Just say no. What do you guys think? I have my own thoughts, but...
Well, I think it starts with data. The most important thing that you can do to influence those around you is to present hard data. Because right now, membership statistics have just been anecdotal. I've heard grandmasters come out saying, we're going to do a one-day class this year. There is no data to suggest that a one-day Masons are more likely to go NPD than those not made out of one-day classes. There's no way that you can counter that without hard facts and data and research. So there are a couple of things you need to do here. You need to encourage your lodge or your Grand Lodge to keep records of membership and to make those publicly available. Yes. Because finding the data is a very difficult thing, as John has alluded to. And then do the extra step of analyzing that data and trying to pull out those things. And then you can take something that, like what John talked about this morning, and present that as a compelling case for your position on one-day conferrals.
Well, can you hear me well if I speak from here like that? Okay. I think if we look at it almost as from a business perspective, if we were in an enterprise and we were doing business experiments to see, engage what our customers wanted, if our products are satisfying their expectations and their needs, if we're paying enough attention, we can make smart decisions about what the next products are going to be, or we can make good decisions about which products are costing us the most and giving us the least return on the investment. These are hard pieces of information that can't be argued with. If we can break it down to all the elements that are contributing or deterring from the goals that we have, well, we can make smart decisions about our business in the future. So what I would say is there is a part of Masonry that has to be treated with the same skill set as an entrepreneur would his business, with being not just so moved by his passions or his what he believes, but instead being able to ask the hard questions, as I mentioned earlier, the right questions, and not taking the answers personally. If you ask the hard question and you get a truthful answer that can't be argued with, then you make the right decision in order to move towards the goal that you're aiming for initially.
And to directly answer the question, what can we do to petition our Grand Lodge to eliminate one-day classes? Don't do what I did and just go right to the Grand Secretary. I think that really is where Masonic protocol and where a groundswell has to happen as well. You do have your lodge secretaries and your district deputy Grand Masters for that reason, that they're there to elevate and represent your area up to the Grand Lodge. So you don't win. You may win certain battles, but you won't win the whole fight if you just try to just go all in and make a big stink out of it, right? Be respectful. Use rhetoric. Understand that that there is a political play involved there, and just do it in a soft approach rather than a hard approach. And another thing I want to just finish up with on the one day is I do want to say I'm not against the fact that leadership and mentorship of those candidates needs to occur. Right? I want to make that clear. That the one-day event just got them through the door, but no matter if they go a short way or the long way, they have to have lodge leadership and mentors that can carry them through the rest of their life. And that is irregardless of what method you use. And so that is something I think it's worth saying that one day is just part of the mechanism of making great Masons. Let's go to the next question. The next popular question is it better for membership numbers to reach 0 than to lower the standards and requirements in the process of bringing in new members? Is it better to die on the vine than to lower your standards?
Masonry, I don't think, is ever going to die like that, because what's at stake here is the essential of membership, looking at Grand Lodge memberships. Masonry, above all, belongs to men and fraternity. To show, really what we're looking at is when we talk about memberships, you're talking about dues. People, it's a business and a fraternity. That's the only difference. Just those two words. If they treat it like a business, you're not going to have to worry about the low number. And is it better to let it die or to go to 0? It's just never going to do that. It will never. It might reach 0 on a Grand Lodge level, but it doesn't mean it's 0 out there. I mean, you've got countless organizations which claim to be Freemasonry, and the only difference is they're using some ritual that's similar, but it's not. It's not exactly what's prescribed. So the idea of Freemasonry is not going anywhere. Grand Lodge number might go down, but...
Well, and I should say I don't think the standards have ever been lowered. I think, at least when I was listening to John's presentation, I was thinking about NPDs. We really don't have the numbers of how quickly they leave after, but at least what I've seen in my experience over a decade or a little bit more is that people will join, not find what they're looking for, and then leave. And I think it's not so much that the standards in which we're looking for in terms of character are lowered. I think the standards in terms of money perhaps might be, or the standards in terms of how quickly we get these guys through, but those are on the lodge side. That's not a candidate issue, and I don't think it is a candidate issue. I think it's mostly the fact that we offer something, but we don't really know how to deal with it. We're offering the Masonic secrets, but we don't really know how to tell a man that when you're holding on to the secret. I mean, we're parroting ritual that we've been saying for 300 years in different forms, essentially saying the same thing, which is these are important secrets because they're important, and that's tautology, word that sounds like tautology. Tautology. There it is. That word that means going around in a circle over and over and over, and it is. It's like a snake eating its tail, and you have to break that and say, it's not just that it's important that you hold the Masonic secrets because they're important. It's that you have to engage that with education and combining those secrets into something that's actually meaningful in that person's life.
Like this.
Yeah. Well,
Sure.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I wanted to commend the brothers here from Pennsylvania because for giving us the opportunity to speak to our brothers in this unique forum, this unique format. I think that I would love to see what the brothers think of this. Not necessarily now for me to hear it, but in your own time, talk amongst yourselves. Was this a worthwhile endeavor? And is this something that you think would yield a good return if other jurisdiction did it? Not just because we want to get invited to all these places. It doesn't matter who goes. The importance is that these kinds of discussions are being had and that brothers they're going home with something. The way the question was posed almost pins you in a corner to say, do you want bad or do you want bad? Or what is better? Neither. We don't have to go to zero, and we don't have to lower our standards. If we increase our standards, and we give the good men that join our fraternity, we give them what they come here looking for. We would increase numbers, and at the same time increase the membership increases, and also the quality of what everyone's getting.
So I'll ask the question a little bit differently. So this was an all or nothing approach, right? Is it better to go completely to 0? we've talked amongst ourselves, and I think most of us probably believe, and this is purely just our own opinions only, that because of the decline in membership, we won't die completely, but the way Masonry is done will change in the sense of smaller lodges, more concise, just more personal Masonry rather than big Masonry, more pulp. Anything you guys want to add to that?
So again, to say reiterate what John was just saying, the idea that Masonry gets so much smaller. You look at Masonry, turn of the century, 1800s, 1700s. Where was Masonry happening? Pubs, small buildings, basements, taverns, all along your eastern coastal seaboard. This is where Masonry was really influential in a lot of aspects. I think in those kind of times when the lodges were smaller, you've got lodges in England that'll shut down or start a new lodge after they get their 27th member. It just feels like there's a good aspect of chipping away at the stone of Freemasonry, refining the group of men until you're left with essentially guys who are like you guys in this room. This 10% of Masonry, or even lower, maybe this 5% of Masonry that's so active, has such a zeal for the fraternity that it means something to come together to educational events, for discussion events, and be able to have these conversations. Like Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania is great. You have delegates here who are listening to questions that you can't ask in some jurisdictions.
That's a good point.
Okay, these guys are listening to these questions, and these are the guys making these decisions for the state with your input, and that's so important to have that open dialogue.
Jason, I have one more, and then we'll move to the next question.
So talking about the fixation on the fraternity as dying, and do we need to open up and make ourselves less exclusive? I don't think that's the case whatsoever. It's not a zero-sum game. Masonry, as Robert and our other panelists have said, is not simply going to die out. I do think it's going to continue to shrink in the future. As having a breakfast with some of the brethren from the academy this morning, and I said, you know what, I really think the future of Masonry is going to be, as we get smaller, as lodges consolidate, they will be farther apart from the brethren, and we might move into an age where technology really helps fill the gap for that Masonic education and Masonic communication, to the point where we might enter a stage, I don't know, it's purely conjecture, where brethren might hop a plane to a big city to get each of their degrees, and then all of their stated communications and their Masonic education programs happen virtually. We don't know, but that's something that we could look forward to and say, you know what, I could see that happening if we continue to shrink. And I'm going to be the first person to say that a smaller fraternity is not a worse off fraternity. It's just, especially if you keep the high quality of men, knowing that high quality in some areas is objective and high quality in other areas is subjective, and you need to define the delineation between the two, because that's where some Grand Lodges are having some issues today.
Wow. Okay, let's move to the next question. This one comes from Brian. I believe that education is key to retention. How do you propose, what do you propose we do to improve the education process and keep the younger, busier brethren engaged? Thoughts?
Back in my year. That's actually kind of interesting, is in Minnesota we have this thing called the Masonic Light Award, similar in style to what the Academy here is doing, but the Academy is going about 1,000 miles per hour compared to what ours is. But ours does have some interesting things. So when we would have a new guy join, at least in my lodge, we'd sign him up. It was like $20, and he would immediately get engaged with learning about what Freemasonry is. He'd have these, and I was in Scouts, so I kind of like these lists where you check off a board and you sign it, and you got the date right there. Similar kind of deal. So it was very nice. They were able to use this program, so that's what we did. And I think the biggest thing is find out the resources that your Grand Lodge is already holding on to educationally, because that's really the key. Because you don't have to reinvent the wheel. I mean, so many times you have a new master come in, and he'll say, well, we're going to do it this way, and then you have another one, no, this way, and they're coming up with new programs, and it just creates a lot of waste, and there's no reason to do that. But almost every Grand Lodge, has a program, or if they don't, the one next door does.
Yeah, that's
So
really a good point, because we have a very rigid structure of how to progress through the degrees of Masonry, right? There are clear, or some places do. The good ones do. But we don't have a structure of Masonic education universally, right? So we know what's required to move to the 3 degrees, but after that, it's left for mostly the individuals. Jason, I know you wanted to give props to at least the academy.
What we're doing here. John and I have been working on our own business to provide Masonic education at more of a global scale. You'll hear more about that in the coming weeks. But looking at the Pennsylvania Academy and the education that you offer the Masons in Pennsylvania, that's huge. The ability to guide research and do correspondence courses, that's something that I wish every jurisdiction had. Virginia has a couple of basic correspondence courses, but they revolve around the methodical digest and the rules and regulations.
Lodge operations.
Lodge operations. Right. And while that's critical from a lodge leadership standpoint, it doesn't scratch the itch of esoterics or history or the sheer fact of the meaning of the term more light in Masonry, which is why we're all here today.
Good. Any other thoughts? Improving the education process and keeping the younger busy brothers engaged.
So in Illinois, they've had something since the early 70s called the Intender Program, where it's a series of then 4 books or 5 books on the threshold, which somebody got before they petitioned. They got a first-degree book afterwards, which contained a catechism, both long and short form versions for our brothers who have memory problems. We had a second-degree book, a third-degree book, and then a last book, which was called A Guide to Further Masonic Education or Research. This is not a guided course. It's guided. It's very much guided now, but in the day that it came out, it was not. It was very just kind of give them the book, let them go. And the issue with that is, it's an intender program, and people always make this mistake that the intender is the candidate. The intender is you're the intender. You have an intendee. So they missed the boat where they would have a mentor with them. Having a mentor work with you consistently on good practices, going through esoterics, going through historical, and even though I don't totally subscribe to the idea of complete leadership classes. I mean, I think we should kind of have those qualities coming in, but having those as something that you can grasp a hold of and have somebody guide you through, I think is perfectly key to having a program for new members and keeping them engaged.
I would like to say, I hear the word program, and I don't know about you, but when I hear the word program, it sounds like a lot of people doing a lot of stuff for a lot of other people. And we don't always have to do something that is so structured and so elaborate that we might procrastinate to present it. We could do as simple, just think about it as chipping at the stone. You have this roughly hewn stone, you have an overall idea of where you want this shape to go, but it takes these little chips at the stone. Every meeting, there is no excuse whatsoever for the Masonic education to be relinquished to whatever time is left after all these other things are done. I'm not diminishing the importance of the other elements of the stated meeting, but the core should be that there is something there that the brother is looking forward to on the next meeting.
So mote it be.
Well, and there's no way to kill business faster than putting education first. Put a 30-minute thing on there. You know once you hit about 8 o'clock, people are going to be speeding through that business because it's like, nope, we don't have any more time. Let's close. And so put the education first, everything else last.
That's something very simple to do. Any other thoughts before we move on to the next one?
Good.
Be bold when it comes to education.
Be bold. Speaking of being bold, we've actually started to address the elephant in the room now, which is the next highest rated topic. What does the panel think of alternative lifestyles joining the fraternity? So we haven't talked about it at all on the show recently.
Well, Seattle was really the core of the Nirvana grunge alternative movement. And while I don't believe Kurt Cobain was a Mason, I think he'd really dig the ideas of the fraternity.
Not that kind of alternative.
Oh, sorry.
Who wants to bite? Who wants to start?
Well, nobody wants to, but we feel the responsibility.
I will.
So we have to address it. And clearly, it is a very difficult subject because even if we were to poll this room, you will have brothers that are in a complete opposite spectrum as the others. It doesn't make us less brothers than one another. Some people have different views in this regard. And yes, it is something that we've, as hard as it is, we've tried to tackle this in our shows. We've dedicated at least 2 shows to expressing ourselves in regards to it.
And we're of differing opinions on the panel.
Yeah,
that's true.
On our opinions on alternative lifestyles, actually.
Well, and it's kind of interesting is actually, I was thinking about this question, and then in my lodge, I had one of the educational pieces I had done was what is Masonic morality and where do you find it? And honestly, it was a 40-minute discussion of I don't know, but I can feel it. And it's very difficult. I mean, we discuss morality in Masonry in such detail, but almost no detail. It's one of those that it's here, we circumscribe our actions, we do all these things, but at the same time, we never actually get to the point of saying these are the things that we are going to state wholeheartedly. This is what Masonic morality is. And so that's the reason why we're in this situation now is that we have so many different definitions. And when your core tenets are you essentially dropped your suitcase of politics and religions at the door and you walk in, you sit down and you do the things that are Masonry, and then when you leave the door you pick the suitcase back up and you leave. It gets very difficult because there is an outside world. You don't just get to live in the lodge 24/7, although I would like to sometimes. And so that's the difficult part is that you have baggage. We all have baggage. We all carry it, and some of us can't drop the suitcase. We carry it in with us, and we just quietly stow it under our seat and growl about it. And that's the problem is, we just don't really have any good definitions of where Masonic morality comes from or if it even exists at all.
Right. So what's the point of Freemasonry, right? We're here to unite men instead of divide men. That's why we put religion and politics outside of the door. And so if we're trying to create harmony in all of our lodges, we really should be focused just on those core tenets of what makes a good person, a good man, and forget about the rest of the lifestyle of the man, right? And I know there is a gray area, but when in doubt, we should be defaulting toward inclusivity and respect for brethren, what unites us rather than what divides us.
And again, this goes back to more conversations that Masons around the world need to have on pulling the objectivity out of the ideas and tenets of morality, because you ask different people from different faith traditions, and they're going to give you different answers and different definitions of morality. And I think that's one of the things that's put us in such a bind in this country, is the idea that we have our own sense of morality, which is directly inspired by our partisan faith.
Very quickly, even in the secular world, people that don't have any affinity to a religion, they struggle with identifying what is moral or what isn't. There isn't a scientifically accepted way of saying, well, this is immoral or this isn't. what we do know is that in lieu of a scientific explanation for what is moral and what isn't moral, we do have organizations that are very ingrained within our lives, and they do have a very specific point of view when it comes to topics like this. What I can tell you from a personal point of view, clearly I'm a heterosexual male and I have a wife and I'm completely fine with, with my lifestyle.
So
but
you
I
say.
know you're wishful thinking.
The guy can drink.
But it is important to say that I have sat in lodge with brothers who are homosexuals, brothers who love another man. And I cannot look at that brother who at the altar took the same obligation that I did, that I cannot look at that brother with disdain. And I cannot look at that brother and think of him as an immoral man when I see that through his example and through his involvement in Masonry, he has set a moral example in the aspects of his life that are public. So it is a very difficult thing to answer, but at least that's how I feel about it.
The next topic is related, which says that Masonic bodies often refer to men with wives or ladies. How do you think being more inclusive and letting in gay married members will affect membership in the future? So I believe the question is more along the lines of bringing in the Masonic family, right, into events. How will that change, the paradigm change, when the Masonic family now includes partners?
So I'm going to start stereotyping here, but stick with me.
Uh-oh.
So there are a couple things Masons like to do. I've known a lot of Masons that like to go to Scotch tastings and cigar smokings. I have not met many. I've met some ladies in my travels who want nothing better than to smoke a good cigar and taste a good Scotch. So I would say if you act more inclusive to domestic partners and husbands of members, you would probably get on par a lot more involvement out of spouses than you'd see from, frankly, any of our wives except for Robert's. It's a Masonic enigma. We love you, Corey. She's watching.
Will she be joining Star, though?
My wife will never join the Eastern Star. I couldn't get her to go. To your point, Jason, it would have no impact whatsoever to have that happen outside of increased attendance and the occasional, perhaps somebody who can't, has reservations about the lifestyle, the occasional look from that kind of a person. That's it. You're looking at a whole. I have a good friend and brother who was just raised, who happens to be gay, and his partner is not interested in Freemasonry in the slightest, but loves attending the events with them. They have a lot of fun, and it's just there's no issue, which is what people think is an issue.
Right. And I think that's a good point, because we've talked amongst ourselves, being in that millennial generation, the newer generation coming in, where there is no stigma per se.
I just don't care.
It's not my thing. I don't care one way or the other. That has no impact on me, and so I'm not going to put second thought to it.
That's cool, bro.
But,
Yeah.
I
I like Chevy. I like Ford.
Okay, good.
Whatever.
But we can't dismiss that there will be brothers who, based on the way that they were raised, the perhaps the religion that they follow, they will not be able to consolidate the two.
Right.
So, and I'm sure there are brothers that are not going to feel comfortable with it, but it's,
It's what it is.
your point of view, we respect it.
Okay. The next question comes from Paul Chamberlain, past master of Greenleaf Lodge 561. Thank you.
Worshipful Paul. Oh wait, we don't use that title, past master.
Right. So Brother Paul asks, of all the different jurisdictions you've seen work in, the ritual, why is Pennsylvania your favorite? And 14 of you voted for it, so.
Well, I can already answer that. I was walking through the lodge room and I was told there would be swords. And so I don't know if some of you don't watch the show, but for whatever reason, I don't know, psychologically. I love the idea of sword fights and all that other stuff. And I heard that 3 of your officers have swords, so 4. 4. I forgot about the time. Oh man. Okay, so
You know
this
what
place
Sigmund Freud
is
would say about
absolutely
Yeah, I was
the
gonna say,
greatest
Nick is
state.
perfect test case for
ever.
Freud.
Pretty much. So yeah, that when I heard that, I was like, this is pretty cool.
Yeah.
So
Dual member for Nick. That's what
Yes.
my wife is watching this video. If I sign one more petition,
Any state that has Punxsutawney in it anywhere, it's our favorite.
Yes, yeah. If it gets us front row seat at Punxsutawney Phil, then we'll talk, Richard.
Good. Next question is, how are degrees handled in a lightweight lodge? I know you talked about that, Nick.
okay.
For
well,
instance, the dinner
yeah.
table lodge, is it just for business, or do
Ooh.
you slide the table aside and go right to work?
Okay, well, here's an interesting thing about Minnesota, and it's gonna. We like table lodges there, and we also have a program in which you can do an entered apprentice degree during a table lodge
Really?
with the tables out. If you want to see the actual program, I'll hook you up, but I'll explain here. So table lodges set up like a horseshoe, and so during my year we had two entered apprentice degrees done as table lodges. It was one of the most fun experiences you'll ever have. The tables don't move. The food is served at interspersed parts during the degree work. It's absolutely it was a blast. I'm not even, and every single candidate we had, they're still members. They still love it. They still remember it because it's probably one of the coolest, most interesting things you can possibly do in a lodge. And so Agape Lodge, this lodge that I'm forming, is going to take that idea and move it to the next level, which would be entered apprentice, fellow craft, and master mason, all done around a dinner table. And it's going to have the tables out, and it's the exact same thing. So it's going to be one of these. It's a new concept. It's under this lightweight thing. There's going to be fewer members, and actually, you know what? I'm going to change the name lightweight because I was told it sounds kind of bad. So because it does make you sound like, Anyway, we're gonna change the name.
If you're having
right now.
food at every meal, lightweight is
It's
not
not-
a term that's going to apply very
No,
long.
it won't. So we're gonna go with agile, which still doesn't apply if you're eating that much food. But we're gonna stick with agile. So there we go.
Thank you, Nick. The next question is, Pennsylvania now offers a discount for veterans joining the fraternity. Are we really meeting on the level when we offer discounts to certain groups or people? Thoughts? Yes. You.
So various lodges across the state of Illinois, and in fact it may be a Grand Lodge rule. Veterans, there isn't a discount for veterans, but active military don't pay. They don't have to pay. And they don't have to pay dues if they're on deployment. They're exempt.
So we do have a backlog of episodes that we kind of kick around the ideas before we roll them out, and one that that we're still working on, but we'll do in a future episode, is on the concept of alternative dues structures, right? And there is no idea that's crazy enough, from $1 dues all the way up to being prorated and based off your salary and everything in between, right? There's pros and cons to all of those, right? Robert?
The biggest pro is to charge $100 a due for dues all the time.
100 all the time.
$100.
Just every time he asks for money.
But specifically, I think. Go ahead.
Oh well, and the thing is, I've actually said one time that I had a thought experiment of the idea of charging $100 a month for dues, and the thing is, and I promise I'm not going to steal any of the thunder from that in a future episode, but I'm going to say this stuff again in that episode. Yeah. But the idea is dues coming in, and this includes prorating and those like that. You have to perceive some kind of benefit, and I think that's the thing. Is like with the veterans one, there's a perceived benefit that those men women can't join Masonry. Duh. But the men that are joining. Well, that's yes. Anyway, You have to have a perceived benefit on both ends, and so with that case, there is a perceived benefit for veterans getting discounted dues. And so the same goes for charging $100 a month. What kind of benefit are you getting back for that $100? And so really the summary of this whole thing is, and I'm sure somebody's going to jump me as I'm going out saying, "Are you crazy? $100 a month?" Is you have to have the benefit that you're charging has to the benefit the person is receiving has to equal the amount charged. So if you're charging very little for dues, the benefit's low, and that's probably why we have NPDs. But there you go.
And I know this
That was
doesn't
simple.
apply. I mean, because I believe the question is that Pennsylvania as a whole is offering a discount. Is that true? But we already have that experiment being done at our local lodge levels. That's why you have different dues for every lodge. And so, you're getting a discount to be a Master Mason if you join a cheap dues lodge rather than, say, a traditional observance lodge.
What about lodges like the Patriot Lodge, which comp the Tyler's dues?
Well, we do one better, actually. We wrote it into our did we write into our bylaws? I can't remember. But for current students of George Mason University, we do offer them a discount. Yep, for current students. And we also have a discount if you are 150 miles away as the crow flies.
And that gets back to Nick's point about perceived benefit matching,
Perceived
what your
the actual
perceived
cost
or actual cost. Yeah.
Perceived benefit.
And so I again see with men and women who have served the United States military, and thank you to everyone here and everybody watching who has done that. There is a real benefit from having these men and women of character in our lodges.
Yep. Good. Okay, next question is.
I'm gonna get jumped.
Jump. This is being recorded right now,
Mm-hmm.
and so you might want to say that like this.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so this question obviously did not come from this room, but I am a new Master Mason in South Alabama. My lodge brothers think that clandestine means black. How do I educate without overstepping bounds? And the average age in Southern Alabama or in Alabama is 68.
Well, these are piece of cake.
Easy question, softball.
Go to the bottom ones. The bottom ones are the easy ones.
What did you have for lunch today?
So, if the question is, how do you educate your members that being black, African American, however you distinguish from clandestine, okay, is simply it's such a erroneous thought to even have that. I think where do you even start? I mean, it's so out of left field and so blatantly just it's ignorant.
Well, and part of that I think is the problem that I know Worshipful Matt Botts has talked to us about, where in Prince Hall Masonry, clandestine Masonry is very much a real bane of their existence, whereas in the regular Grand Lodge levels, it's not nearly as intrusive. So clandestine Masonry and dealing with spurious Grand Lodges is a very real and present threat and danger to the Prince Hall way of Masonry. So being that Prince Hall has typically, been a place for minorities, I could see where someone being ignorant of the reason why Prince Hall formed in the first place would equate clandestine Masonry to along ethnic boundaries.
For those of you who haven't noticed, I'm not particularly white.
He's an honorary.
Just in case you don't see. But I want to tell you a very quick story about something that happened to me early when I moved to the States. I've spoken English since I was 11.
Where are you from?
I was born and raised in the beautiful island of Puerto Rico. It's a middle-sized island in the Caribbean. Born in Puerto Rico, very proud of my culture, very proud of my people, of everything they stood for. And in Puerto Rico, the division is not a racial division, because as you may know, our entire island is made up of Spaniard descent, African, and Taino Indians. Well, the division then becomes in social class. So to me, division had nothing to do with the color of my skin, or how cool my straight hair looked, or how can you make a little ball out of your hair. That had nothing to do with the separation of race. And I can see some of you are in shock that I'm talking about this. Color had nothing to do with it, but that was the culture that I was in. The point I want to make is that when I first came to this country, I didn't consider myself any less than anybody else I met. I was a man, that I had certain values and I had certain things that I liked. And I came across an individual in a job that I had, and he said, "Where are you from?" And I told him, "I'm Puerto Rican." And he's like, "Oh, wow. But you don't behave like a Puerto Rican." Now, where does that reaction come from? That reaction comes from their ignorance. Now, I'm not saying that they're dumb. I'm saying that they ignore some facts. They lack the knowledge of what a decent Puerto Rican man holds as his values. And I set it out for myself that I wanted to be as best as I could an example of what a Puerto Rican is. Because the majority of the men of character that I know from the beautiful island of Puerto Rico are decent men that would never make you think that I wasn't behaving like a Puerto Rican. So I think in response to this question, yes, there's a generational issue here, that previous generations to ours were perhaps a little less inclusive, but I think some of that lack of inclusiveness comes from not knowing in the personal level these people that really, although from different colors and different lifestyles, they do carry themselves in a moral and virtuous way.
Combat ignorance with education. And there's only so much that education will bring to the fight. But at that point, if someone is educated and they're a bigot, there's nothing else you can do.
You can't change their mind. Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I mean, the real clear answer there is that go find the source, go find where it's written in your Grand Lodge code about what makes something clandestine or not. If you can't find it, then there you go. But I also study change management for organizations as well, and by clearly setting out logical instructions and logical arguments, that's only part of the thing. We've talked about the logos, the pathos, and the ethos, the three elements of rhetoric and discussion and dialogue. And so just having the what, the very logical thought process, is only a piece of communication. You also have to get across the emotional aspect, right? Because people are going to come with their own filters, their own baggage, their own emotions into this. And by merely stating a fact to them, they can still shut it down because that doesn't hit them here. It hits them here, but it doesn't hit them here. And so you have to consider that as well when you're trying to educate, that you have to educate the heart as well as the mind.
Pick an easy question this time.
Yes, so I can.
What's your favorite fruit?
The very next question is, Masonically speaking, how much wood can a woodchuck chop?
I haven't received that degree yet, but I'm very excited.
It's the beaver degree. The beaver degree.
Yeah, they conferred it at York Rite Masonic Week.
Man,
Yeah, I know. You're going to have to come out to it at some point.
It's a new bond.
They tacked it on to the operatives.
Right. But isn't a woodchuck also a groundhog? So I'm going to defer that question to Richard Ingham.
Oh, yes.
Who's a past master of the Punxsutawney Lodge. So what's the answer, Richard? I know you've been asked. Yes, okay. He's taking an action to come back and put that on the Grand Lodge website.
We will share his answer with all of you.
Make a motion that we table this question.
Second?
Do not.
Because there's no parliamentary procedure in Masonry.
That's right. Kenneth Lotman, who's a fan of the show, comments on just about every other episode. He's listening from Texas right now. Asks, What do you think would be some of the best ways to bring our fraternity into this century so that it would be more appealing to future generations? Not just target, the way I read that is not just target or the current generation coming in, but the generation after them.
You know, I actually had an interesting question asked of me a while ago. Somebody early on when I was blogging said, "So Masonry is just you paying for friendship, right?" And it was, I mean, it's a shocking question, right? I mean, it's like technically yes, no, but the thing is, to bring this fraternity into the future, it's kind of interesting when we remark about traditional observance, European concept, these ideas of bringing much more formality, or something like civil, which is complete informality. You know, I mean, it's the idea that you're not even having to leave your house to go to a lodge. I don't know if we can even answer that question.
Castle Island Virtual Lodge.
Oh, I should explain. Okay, so there is a lodge in Manitoba, but it's not in Manitoba. It's online, just like we are right now. And we, as the panelists on one of the episodes, before we actually did the episode, we actually traveled through the computer, like Tron, to this lodge. And so this lodge uses WebEx. It's a regular lodge, so there isn't any regularity issues. Grand Secretary was there, so we're okay. But
we sat in lodge with Nick before we ever met him.
This is the first time I've met Jason.
We have never met Nick until yesterday, but yet we've sat in lodge with him.
Yeah.
So that's possibly the future. I mean, it's this idea that the future could be, you know, you were discussing this idea that so many lodges are going to close to the point where they're just going to be in certain areas, and then perhaps the business is done, you know, just like most business is done in most businesses, online through a telepresence, and then, you know, you meet once or twice a year in an actual lodge meeting. I mean, it's very possible. I mean, it's hard to pretend to be a futurist, because you know in 25 years you're going to be wrong, in 10 years you're going to be wrong, and even 5 years you're most likely going to be wrong. But I think the way in which technology is really driving itself into Masonry is going to really confuse us. I think more than it's going to help or hinder us.
I'm still waiting for a hoverboard.
You know, they don't let you bring those on planes anymore. Yeah.
Oh, they spontaneously combust.
Yeah,
those aren't hoverboards.
Oh, okay. And they kept saying that at the airport. It was really throwing me off. I'm like, am I in Back to the Future too? This is really weird.
So that's a good idea. I mean, you do have to look at the demographics of what's going on, the legacy of Masonry. Too often we are nearsighted, and hopefully I showed that in my presentation today too, that we look at short-term problems because that's how long our leadership stays in that position. And we really all need to man up and look at the longer-term issues.
Knee-jerk reactions are going to kill us.
Yes, they are. I'm going to read the next question, but when I do, because we wanted to open it up for questions on the floor too, if we didn't get theirs then, just kind of raise your hand and make sure we'll get a wireless mic out to you, and then you'll be called on right after this.
I think this gentleman had something to say. Did you have a question, sir? No?
Okay. Right. So anyway, while I read this one, if you want to raise your hand, and someone potentially with a wireless mic will come to you.
If not, we'll repeat the question.
Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on the incentive program that the Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania recently instituted, which rewards members with material items for being a first-line signer? We mentioned this on the show a little while back, where if you sign up so many Masons and they join Masonry, I believe there's a time requirement as well that they have to be active for another 6 months or so, that you could get points that could then be spent later on for actual merchandise.
Swag.
So I don't know if it's this way in every Scottish Rite Valley. Scottish Rite Valley of Chicago holds an annual awards night. Okay, they give out pins to first-line signers for members who join the Scottish Rite. If you get five of them, and all of a sudden they take your pin away and they put a diamond in your pin and they give it back to you. There are guys who I know who have 5 diamond pins, which means they've signed over 100 Scottish Rite petitions. It's an award structure. and there's raffles that they enter these guys in and everything else. It's kind of the elephant in the room, I think, at valleys that do this, is that there is a certain amount of when you get enough members in, what does it do for your organization? For Freemasonry in general, Pennsylvania, it means membership. It means dues that come in. It means they can provide for events and facilities like this. Valleys, it means membership means not only that, but it also means that they can elect honorary 33rd degree members who can influence positive changes in the districts. I think the structure of being able to award somebody, I don't think there's anything particularly wrong with it, as long as it's not lost in sight. Like, I'm not going to go out and just sign a bunch of first-line top signs because I want points to buy a CD player.
Right.
That, yeah.
And so, talking to members outside during the break, I'm of the mind that because we have that retention problem, because we need to figure out what people like, we need to experiment more. I'm not saying innovate beyond our traditions, but understand what the membership does and likes and makes them tick. And every lodge has to do that. And so as part of this experimentation, the Grand Lodge has taken a huge risk in trying something different, trying something new. And who knows if it's going to work, right? But what I encourage every single lodge, every single district, and every single Grand Lodge, that when they try to experiment, they capture as much data as possible, right?
For you.
For me,
For you.
specifically for me, to go back and look to see, with data, did it actually work or not? Make sense?
To your point, you talked about to try these things out. A good friend of mine is a brother, Dr. Mike Shirley, who's also on the Midnight Freemasons. He's always said to me, anyway, the most un-Masonic things you can say are, we've always done it that way, and we've never done it that way.
Right.
And I'm sure that sentiment is shared by many of you.
Say lots of head nods, yeah.
Yeah, and so we're a progressive society, which means we have to make constant changes and adapt to the ages as time goes on. So to have, to avidly and vehemently oppose of a program that we have no data on yet,
Right.
It's premature.
And I'm not inherently opposed to the idea of incentivizing first and second line signers. However, it needs to be the requirements of being a first or second line signer, specifically with mentorship and instruction, need to be made very, very, very clear, because what we don't want to have happen, I see this as a way to reward those members who are putting themselves out there and saying, you know what, you would be a wonderful Mason, let me help you.
Yeah.
This is not a means of men going out and saying petition, 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 petition. We'll do a one day and I'll see you in lodge next year. It needs to be everything in moderation, and you need to put in safeguards to make sure that the system isn't being taken advantage of. So if you are, I have said, you know what, I can't be a second line signer for you because I do not have the bandwidth right now to be able to give you the mentorship that you need. And I think that is a perfectly reasonable thing to do as a man and Mason. Now the other side of that is, however, I will introduce you to this brother who would be glad to sign for you, because you don't want to be a stumbling block for anyone trying to come into the fraternity who fits the mold. But you need to be as cognizant of your own duties and responsibilities as their mentor as you are of them coming into the fraternity.
So I think we can stop the online questions here because we're approaching quickly 3 o'clock. But I wanted to see if there's anyone who had a burning question that they just wanted to jump in there. Yes, sir. Do we have a microphone? Okay, microphone's coming down the aisle.
All right, Chuck.
Okay.
One second.
Oh,
One
okay.
second. There's a question up front. We'll repeat it. Say again, Chuck. So the question is, how do the 5 of you guys ever get together and form the roundtable?
Well, it has to do with astral traveling, and 4 of us had out-of-body experiences and entered the mind of Robert Johnson, and all of TMR's shows actually happen in his head.
Right. This right here is all his reality.
Yeah.
Now, long story short, I'd been a fan of Nick's blog, Millennial Freemason, and Robert and Juan's podcasts, and had said, those are great, but they're usually one-way mediums. They're usually, here's my content I want to share, and you get some comments on that. And meanwhile, being an Android phone fan, a Google fan, there was a great tech website called Droid Life that did a conversation of the latest technology, and they did it via Google Hangouts. I said, well, we like to talk, right? We like to talk masonry, and that experience you get when you have a great lodge meeting and you're still hanging out outside of the lodge room, talking to your brethren, and you lose track of time. Can we try this experiment? And that's exactly what it was. Just like I just said earlier about your Grand Lodge experiments. We ran an experiment. I asked these guys, I didn't know them from Adam. I said, hey, can we try this one night? 30 minutes of your time. Let's try it and see what works. We recorded an episode 2 years ago, and then kind of shared it on Facebook and our respective Facebook groups, and it exploded overnight.
Literally overnight.
We had no idea that the next day there would be thousands of downloads, and so we said, guys, we got to do this again. It was not planned to grow that way, but we're glad it did, and here we are.
And this is, TMR, or the Masonic Roundtable, is very much a living, breathing experiment of grassroots education. Yeah, we have 25,000 listeners a month based on the metrics that we're pulling from our podcast and our YouTube videos, and we do not advertise the show. It is all word of mouth and social media marketing.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So let's take one more question in the back, and then we'll hand it back to our Grand Lodge representatives.
Okay. When we're looking at the data going back to non-payment of dues, are we looking at it in the correct way? If we're staying steady, say 3,000 suspensions a year for non-payment of dues, and you're going, that's a level field, but we're looking at the fact that membership in the lodge is going down, and the Grand Lodge is going down, doesn't that mean we're actually doing a worse job with our suspensions because percentage-wise we're losing a greater percentage at that 3,000 members now versus 10 years ago at the same 3,000 members? And just a little information for you that came up earlier was something about time period where you see the most suspensions. I know I'm past District Deputy Grand Master, and I actually looked at these numbers last year or something like that in our district, and it seems like from 5 to 10 years is members are your greatest loss of membership due to non-payment of dues. Mm-hmm. And I have theories on that too, but that's another story.
So specifically, when I looked at the totals, and while the initiation or passing or raising rate fluctuates, the trend line is stable, right? So we're not, even despite 1 days, we're not growing, we're not raising more people at a faster rate. And also at the same time, it's a trending flat line. Non-payment of dues is a trending flat line. Deaths are getting slower, so deaths are decreasing. But again, we have control over non-payment of dues members. And so if we can focus on that and say, don't just assume that that's okay. That if, again, the current statistic is about 2 out of every 10 from initiation to non-payment of dues rate is leaving, then I wouldn't be okay if I had 10 children and 2 of them died and I just said that's okay. I'd like to have 0 non-payment of dues members, right? I'd like to have all my children live. And so we have to get out away from complacency in what these numbers are telling us and take an active approach to reducing that number, hopefully to 0. It's a noble task. I mean, it's not gonna be easy, but overall, we're initiating about the same rate for the past 15 years. Non-payment of dues are about the same rate. and death is declining. So that let's focus on what we can change. With that, any final thoughts from the panel before we hand it off? A big thank you for sure. Yep.
So yeah, before we step down, I just want to make sure we give a very heartfelt thanks to the Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania, and more specifically the Pennsylvania Academy, for all that you do in Masonry. This is something that I wish we had everywhere.
Yes.
And I'm biased, but this is a wonderful event, and the Masons living in and around Pennsylvania are very, very lucky to have something like this, even twice a year, but more so the education program that goes behind it. You're in a very, very privileged position, and we have nothing but wonderful things to say about what you all are doing to further Masonic education in your state.
That's a great conclusion. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you.
Brother Schick, close this out.
Brother John, you want to come up? Well, what a fantastic day this has been. You guys really did an outstanding job in terms of spreading Masonic light, informing us, introducing us to all sorts of new ways of getting Masonic education across. We really do appreciate it. Let's have a round of applause for the Masonic Roundtable. And now John Postlewaite will give us our traditional closing.
Many years ago, I was told if you're called upon to make a presentation, make sure you're never scheduled after a children's act or animals, dog show. I'm going to add another line to that. Trying to speak after this group that we've had today, they're hard to beat. I assure you, I'm not going to beat you, but the brothers
I didn't know
here
if we were
are
the children or the animals.
There's a terrific online Masonic magazine, and I don't know how many of you have access to it. It's called A Small Town Texas Lodge, and the webmaster calls himself Old Corky. A lot of the articles in that magazine are Texas-oriented, but we forgive them. And I finally discovered the other day, I'm going to have to start saving these, printing them off and saving them, because that gentleman who is 100% Mason is also 87 years old. So I'm not going to be able to steal a lot of his materials much longer. But one of the favorites I read on his magazine article last month described a Mason. He said, I went to my stated meeting, and as customary, we were served a meal before the meeting. And he said, I'm sitting there and I'm eating my frozen lasagna that they'd bought at the discount store down the street, served on a paper plate, and I was trying to eat it with plastic silverware. He said, that bothered me a little bit, because I knew, hey, we've got some good china back here. We have real metal silverware. And he said he really wasn't too appreciative of the split hot dog rolls they were giving us, and they put a little bit of garlic butter, because he said they were a lot cheaper than buying garlic bread. He said, I glanced over on the counter, and the plastic bag that held the mixed vegetables, the lettuce and carrots and whatever, all sealed up nice, looked like the same bag that they had bought at that discount store a month earlier. No one opened it then either. And I'm sitting there thinking, we're supposed to be a classy group, and we're sure not tonight. And they thought, oh, we weren't last month or the month before that either. So then suddenly, one of the senior members of the lodge stormed in. He was all huffing and puffing and red-faced, had a bundle of papers in his hand. And he said, what's wrong? And he slammed them down on the table and said, look at this. I asked my son to do something for me this afternoon. I had a Masonic subject that I wanted to know more about it. So I don't really know how to use the computer that well. So I asked my son to do it. And I noticed, he was there pressing the keys, and every once in a while he'd stop and he'd look at the screen and he'd laugh. He said, finally I got really curious. I said, what are you laughing about? He said, come over here and look, Dad. And he had printed off a series of Masonic memes. And he said, the old man said, no, look at this. What right do those people on the outside have to make fun of our great fraternity? And the gentleman that was going to the meeting said, but outsiders didn't put these on. And he said, well, what good Mason would ever do something like that to disgrace us so much? And he said, our new members. And I said, well, why? He said, because they're showing the world exactly what we're giving them, and they're telling about it. And he said, we've worked for years to try to get younger men into the fraternity. He said, we're just beginning to turn the corner on that. And I think from the observations I've seen at the lodges I visit, at the academy here, we're getting a lot younger, brethren. Our median age is slowly going down, which is good because old guys like me are not going to be around that much longer. But, you've all seen them, how many Masons it take to change a light bulb, and you've got to make sure your secretary's there so you can put it in the minutes and look it up and see how they did it the last time. He said, that's what we're showing them. He said, they're just a little smarter than us, and they're putting it in a more acceptable manner. He said, they don't want to go to the same boring meeting month after month after month. The lodge is open, the minutes are read, old business, new business is taken care of. They give the closing charge, the lodge closes, and everyone goes home. So that's not why these men joined. It's probably not even the reason you joined. Although sometimes I wonder, because when I joined and when many of you brothers out there joined, we didn't know what we were joining. I'd love to be a used car salesman and work with that group. Because, they said, well, we can't tell you that. We can't tell you what we do. We can't tell you what's going to happen to you. And yet we were still dumb enough to give them that check and get accepted. And they said, but we've got to realize that just as I thought maybe somebody had looked at my notebook over lunchtime, said, our problem isn't getting new members, it's keeping the ones we have. Because as far as new members are concerned, a lot of Grand Lodges have had a lot of programs. The first one I can remember in Pennsylvania was the Solomon Project. And we've had one-day classes, and we've lowered requirements, and we've eliminated a lot of memorization that used to be required. And guess what? It's not working. We're getting a few more people in, but they don't stay because we don't give them what they want. And what do they want? Our millennial generation, and you guys are old now because you realize there's been 2 generations after you guys. The newest one is the I generation. Guess what I stands for? All the technology and customizing programs for people. So they want to join an organization that they'll enjoy going to the meetings. They want to join an organization that is purposeful and meaningful and does things. He said, and if we don't give them that, they're going to leave us before we ever have time to learn their names. And he said, with all these good programs, not once do I know of any Grand Lodge in the country that has gone to the new members or the prospective members and said, what do you want? What do you expect? And he said, until we do that and customize our lodges to meet their expectations, we're going to be in trouble. Now, before all of you start grabbing your chest back there saying, we can't change our lodges like that, the new members value the traditions, the experience, the expertise that the more senior members have. They want that. They say, no, don't get rid of that. But we want to be able to go to lodge. We want to be able to learn something. We want to be able to sit down and have meaningful dialogue, either before, during, or after the meeting. And I think if we give them that, it's going to help. Pennsylvania took a huge step, 15, 20 years ago, when they created the Academy of Masonic Knowledge. To the best of our knowledge, when we formed that, it was the first one in the country. Now, I don't quote me on that, because I know there have been many more that have sprung up after that, but we were one of the early ones at least. In addition to that, we created the Research Lodge, where Pennsylvania Masons can present research papers. And as I look at the audience, particularly the Research Lodge, and to almost the same extent here, I see a lowering of the age of the people coming in and attending. I think that's great. I think we're going to have to do more things of this nature, because we need, one, to replace ourselves, and two, we need to make this a bigger, better fraternity than it was when we joined. And I think if we play to the needs and wants of our incoming brethren, we can make that happen. I was talking to a young member who had been in, I think, March. He said we would be in 1 year. And I said, well, you've been very active. Why? He said, because I like all the ritual. And I got my 3rd degree in the next meeting. I went back and they grabbed me and they put me in a chair and said, here, you'll like this. And unfortunately, I think that happens too often. And he said, but yeah, I'm one of those few that like it. I said, well, there are several people in your age bracket that joined at the same time. Anytime I've made an official visit to your lodge, I've never seen them. He said, they don't come. And I said, well, what do you want? He said, well, I like this. He said, but I also like to read. I read a whole lot about Masonry. And he said, by the way, do you have any books I can read? We took care of him. And I said, well, did you know what you were getting into? He said, no, not really. He said, but I enjoy what I did. And I said, well, I wonder how many of the people who joined with you and did not come back or are not coming back really knew what they wanted or are getting what they wanted. And he said, well, obviously they're not getting what they wanted or they'd be coming back. And he said, one of them lives right down the road from me. And I called him several times saying, hey, it's lodge tonight. Do you want to ride into town together? And he said, no, I'm not going. And I said, well, what do you think about asking before men join? And he came up with what I thought was a brilliant suggestion. Didn't take a whole lot of thought on his part. He said, well, when your investigating committee comes out, why don't you have them ask what he expects? And I thought, hey, that's a great idea. You're getting it right from the horse's mouth, so to speak. Here's what I think I'm joining. What we have to do as Masons is pay attention to those wants and desires and try to implement them the best we can into our lodges. And I think we'll be successful. I want to thank the men up here for the got me all choked up, for the wonderful presentation today. I think you were right on with your information. We certainly enjoyed you. And since most of us are old, our memories won't last too long, so we may, when we forgot what you say, we may ask you back.
Be happy to do so.
Okay. We'll also be on YouTube.
As soon as I get a computer, we'll look at you.
Just get your kids or grandkids involved. Pick up a bookmark and be like, here, Make this happen. Works every time.
All
About
right.
half the time.
Yeah.
It's every time.
All right. Rather than late there, the hour is getting late. I think it's time for our closing prayer, and we'll be on our way. Let us pray. Most holy and glorious Lord God, we beg you to hear our prayers of thanksgiving at this time. We thank you for the opportunity we've had today to meet with our brothers and to share friendships, make new friendships, and renew old ones. We thank you for the knowledge that we've gained and for the wonderful fellowship we had over the luncheon table. We thank you for our program today and especially for our talented presenters. Help us to change and adapt our lodges to the best of our ability so that we might preserve and protect and advance this wonderful fraternity. We ask you to watch over us on our way home. Give us safe passage. We ask in thy holy name. Amen.
So motive be.
Have a safe trip, brother.
Thank you very much. I'll say about the, yeah, what time do you want to meet up again? Good job as usual.
That's why they pay me.